The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking robotics, and I'm going to be joined by two guests today. I'm going to be joined by Kevin Heath. He is the Director of Robotics over at Dematic. And I'm also going to be joined by Jim Skelding, who is VP of Sales and Marketing for Motion Controls Robotics, and they are both a part of the Robotics Group, which is an industry group part of MHI. So we're going to cover a little bit about what is the Robotics Group all about, but then we're going to dive into what does the robotics market look like today and going into the new year as well. Some challenges there, what adoption looks like, and how users can really prepare themselves or how they can navigate the market itself when they're looking at robotics. So Kevin and Jim, welcome to the show today. How are you both?
Thanks. Doing well.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Definitely happy to get you both on here. Happy to talk about this. I think that robotics in the warehouse and DC space is certainly exciting, and a lot of people are intrigued by it. So I think it's very important that we dive into this topic and discuss it today. So before we kind of dive into more of the meat of the conversation here, I mean, maybe Kevin, you want to kick us off here. Just tell us a little bit about the robotics group and what that means and what kind of resources that for people out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So within the MHI organization, there's a subgroup, the Robotics Group, TRG for short, that was established a number of years ago with a growing, I'll say, demand in the customer portfolios for further automation, robotic arms, gantry robots, autonomous mobile robots, right? These types of technologies didn't really have a group that was specifically focused on these more advanced automation technologies as part of warehousing. So as that group was formed, a group of like-minded companies have come together, formed up a nice group here that is really focused on these advanced automation technologies and really putting some good focus in on how do we explain those technologies to our customers, how do we work together in a collaborative way that really moves the needle in a positive direction for the technologies in the warehousing space. So we get together to talk about marketing opportunities for TRG, podcast events like this, right? There are social events. One of the big advantages of the TRG is bringing the member companies and the individual contributors together into a safe space where people take the logos off their shirt, right? And we just have a technology level discussions to really advance how do we make forward progress in this space for our customers. So it's a pretty exciting space to be in, as you mentioned, right? Advanced automation is great, and definitely our customers are seeing a big push, just kind of pulling us into that space. So yeah, TRG is all about that focus.
Interesting. And I think it's such a great thing, like you mentioned, taking I like how you said that, taking the logo off the shirt, essentially. I think that's a good line there. But, I think that makes so much sense, especially for an industry where, we're seeing a lot of kind of in the last few years, I will say, like a lot of rapid advancement and certainly more adoption of technology and things like that. It's good for, these companies to be able to collaborate together and figure out, how can they work together in some way? How can they learn from each other, right? And how can they, I guess, at the end of the day, right, from the audience perspective, at the end of the day, really deliver for the end user and give them great solutions there. So I think that's a really great thing to be able to do that. So we mentioned, it's an exciting space, definitely a lot of like changes happening, a lot of new technologies coming out. It seems like every other month there's some interesting robotics or advanced automation solution that's floating around there, and I see all these cool videos coming out and everything. So let's dive into kind of what the market itself looks like right now. So Jim, do you want to maybe kick that off for us and tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in the robotics market itself?
Sure. As we head into Q4 of 24, I think Kevin can attest the beginning parts of this year and through the summer were quite lean. Most manufacturing in the U.S. was down, including manufacturers and custom automation houses like ourselves. So we did see a somewhat of a dip compared to the last 3 to 4 years. Nothing will compare to the post-COVID supply chain, free for all it was 22 and 23. The business was very good. Orders were very, very plenty and very often. Fortunately, most integrators had a good batch of backlog. So for us, the downturn in the summer was actually a blessing in disguise. It enabled us to get a little bit reorganized and catch back up. But as we go into Q4, the quoting and the release of funds is on a pretty steep incline. We're seeing tremendous activity in food and beverage, consumer goods, construction materials, and some pharma and medical as well. So business is looking very strong for Q4 and into 2025.
Interesting. And Kevin, what about you? What are you seeing on your side?
Yeah, Jim did a nice job giving that overview, and our business is correlated fairly closely to that, right? Where we have seen a bit of a plateauing effect through the past year or so. Not really a decline per se, but definitely not a steep rise like we had been on, right? So definitely seeing that, and that manifests itself down into the robot space as well. I'm speaking from an overall business perspective for our company, but in the robot space, yeah, that's manifested into a plateau effect. So definitely correlated in that regard. We do see niches, right, where maybe robot arms are on a slight decline while AMRs are on a slight incline, right? So there's some ebbs and flows within the same technology space, that some different trends that we were seeing.
Interesting. And so I'm curious there. I mean, as we saw, like Jim, you mentioned there, about like post pandemic, right, and COVID and everything, that there was this huge boom basically in the supply chain space where, people were trying to figure it out and, give all this attention to their infrastructure and their supply chain in general. And, lots of new companies popping up too with new technologies to solve all these issues. And, certainly seen kind of that plateau, I guess, as you mentioned there, Kevin, as well. So I'm curious, I mean, how are we seeing and where are we at in terms of like adoption of robotics and automation in the warehousing space? And I'll open that up to both of you, whoever wants to chime in.
Yeah, I'll chime in here. I mean, the post-pandemic shift, larger companies, distributions, they're once bitten, twice shy. They are not going to put their companies and their distribution network in the same situation we did coming out of COVID, with the added supply chain dilemma with, 9 to 12 months to get simple electric components that are very common in every automation project.
Yeah.
So the push is to build up the automation that leads into the labor issues that everyone is having. The adoption of some of the newer technologies that are out there are really focused around the fastest implementation, the low-hanging fruit, if you will, the fastest or the easiest target. How can I replace this, case packing or order picking system that I just can't seem to get employees to show up on time or show up at all? So that is a big part of the shift from the post-pandemic issues that we did have.
Interesting. So still seeing some challenges there, I guess, around labor in that sense. Like you're talking about, replacing some of these tasks that is, needs to be done or quite repetitive in a sense, and how do we kind of address those in a way? So Kevin, what are you seeing from like an adoption perspective? Are you seeing
Yeah,
similar?
yeah, fairly similar. So we do see a lot of our customers anxious to upskill their labor and
Mm,
then really focus their labor where the labor makes the most sense, right? Those cognitive tasks, those high dexterity tasks, and really trying to automate those tasks that are more mundane, right? More simple. Definitely see it in the robot arm space. We do also see a trend of replacing conveyors with mobile technologies.
mm,
That trend is definitely underway. So I would say the adoption of the AMR space is kind of accelerating at a pretty rapid clip, where the sunsetting of traditional hard automation seems to be a trend that's well in front of us, right? So it's
mm,
definitely something that's in the forefront. But from an adoption perspective, I think customers are definitely transitioning from the trial stages
mm,
to the full adoption stage, right? So we're seeing less onesie, twosie type of applications and more, all right, I've now tried this technology. I understand what it is. I'm ready to put in 5 cells, 10 cells, 20 cells. So
mm,
so that adoption is underway here in the supply chain warehousing space.
mm. Interesting. And I'm curious from that perspective. It's you talk about the technology there too as well, where there's a lot of kind of, I guess, there's a couple of different factors there, right? When you're trying some of this technology, right? Is the technology fully there, I guess, right? Is the one question to test it out and see, can it keep up and do and deliver on what the promise is or the expectation is. But then the other is kind of just the culture of adopting it, I guess, in a sense, right? And, seeing like how can we work with it in the operation. So, I mean, is the technology for, I guess, the majority of these solutions now, I mean, is it at the level where, it can be like more heavily adopted in a quicker manner? Like you said, like instead of, doing more onesie twosies, now I'm going out and I'm doing maybe 10, 15, 20 or something like that. Is that more prevalent now and, people are feeling more comfortable about doing that?
I think it depends a lot on the technology itself, right?
Mm,
So let's use a fairly simple application of a robotic palletizer, right? A SKU
okay.
pure, build pallet after pallet of the same SKU, right? So that, Jim can definitely attest that that's a high runner, very easy application, and mass deploying those at scale is, I don't want to speak for lead times for Jim's team, but I'm sure it's a very quick turnaround. Whether you buy 1 cell or 10 cells, it's a very similar time frame for whether you buy one or whether you buy 10, right?
Mm,
Similarly in the AMR space, right? If you're buying 20 AMRs that are moving from point A to point B, or you're buying 100 AMRs to move from point A to point B, that overall implementation time is very similar regardless of fleet size, right? So similar trend. Jim, you have any additional comments there?
Yeah, let me just add there to the, what we're seeing a lot of is folks want modular, they
mm,
want portable, and now what's creeping up lately is mobile robotics, meaning robotic arms on some sort of vehicle, versus okay, my production floor is in this side of the building and the central palletizing or, case packing and palletizing and truck docks is on the other side of the building. So the two issues with those options, meaning quick deploy, modular, portable versus a centralized palletizing, obviously is his initial upfront cost
mm,
and startup time. You know, big or medium-sized centralized automation systems are usually, roughly a year before you're up to full speed. So what the modular, the portable, and even some of the mobile applications do for you is it allows you that, crawl, walk, run theory. So I can get one in, I can get my maintenance staff familiar with working on it. I can get my operators comfortable, for those who are not around robots. I can get them comfortable working around robots. I can dial them in, I can tweak them, and then I can mass deploy. And that's kind of what Kevin was referring to. They go through the trial. Let's try it, whether it's on a try it you buy it type program or just a pilot line. but then this mass implementation happens after that. We're seeing far more multiple robot systems that are picking 1, 2 cases at a time or doing 1 or 2 tasks at a time versus a centralized area where one robot is doing multiple things or multiple cases at a time. Much easier to deal with, much from the manufacturer side on my side of the table, we can stock subassemblies. We can forecast our robot purchases. So in this case, Fanuc America, who is our choice, we can pre-order those and have those sitting in a warehouse on their turf, not ours. And then we can standardize on other components. One big panel. It's one panel size for up to, X amount of lines that we can do. So that when the customer comes in and says, okay, I want one, we can give that first one to them, in under 20 weeks. Some folks out there are saying stock, which a lot of integrators are doing that, it's extremely rare, but it's working, and I've seen it work, so it's impressive. But getting that first one installed in a quarter versus a year, it's great. It just, there's all kinds of benefits for it.
Yeah.
And then mass producing them, then the customer can breathe a sigh of relief. I don't have to worry about that, $5 million upfront cost. I just worry about that $500,000 each time I buy one of these, and I can do that in a much shorter time and pay for it in a much shorter time.
Interesting there. And I think it's interesting too, this kind of shift you're both talking about here a little bit and moving more towards the mobile applications, right? I think, even Kevin, you mentioned earlier, people looking at mobile robots versus putting in like traditional conveyor, right? Which I think is pretty interesting. So, and obviously that faster deployment that you mentioned there, Jim, is, I think, if we talk to any operator, any warehouse, if you tell them you could deploy something faster, they're probably going to listen a little more, right? So I guess in that same sense, one of the conversation I think for a long time and then still always is around ROI itself, right? And if I'm gonna invest in these technologies and they're a little more expensive, but I think we're seeing some of the pricing come down a little bit on that. What is that ROI gonna be, and how is that looking? What is, I know it's kind of dependent maybe on the application or solution itself, but are we seeing generally, as there's more market penetration and more adoption, that ROI is getting faster and becoming a shorter time frame?
In general, yes. Although we know that especially in the U.S., the inflation is impacting that, with the cost of goods going up. So the ROI is oftentimes still a challenge, but we see that our customers are getting more creative in the way that they're calculating and justifying ROIs. We also see a big push into robot as a service financing trend, which definitely makes an impact on that ROI statement as well. Helping their cash flow is one of the main goals there, right? Also related to ROI, tied to that is performance guarantees. A number of our customers are really focused on the performance guarantees that go along with that contract. And the ROI coupled with those performance guarantees is really what gives them the confidence to move forward, even with a little bit longer ROI period.
And so I guess for the audience, if they're not familiar, like the performance guarantee would mean that, okay, you're saying as the integrator or whoever's putting the solution in, that the robot will do X amount of productivity, moves, whatever the case may be, whatever it's doing. Is that what you're mentioning there?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So
Okay.
so it's taking a contractual throughput and putting some extra teeth into that contractual language, if you will.
Interesting. I think that's even kind of a testament to how far the technology has come, right? I mean, to say that, like, okay, yeah, we can guarantee something like this, and that it will meet that expectation. I think that's a good thing for the industry. Maybe a little tough, maybe sometimes on the contract side, but at the same time, like, I think that's good, like, kind of vote of confidence in the technology itself. And you also mentioned in there, customers are getting a little more creative with ROI calculations. So dig into that a little more. Tell us, what do you mean by creative?
Yeah, so really looking at their labor availability, their labor
Mm,
quality, the not just the building space or the hard asset itself, but what is the potential loss of business if I don't do something, right? So these other factors that are less tangible are being used to help that customer really understand how valuable is this component that I'm working on. Jim, I'm sure
interesting.
you have similar
Yeah.
similar expanded ROI calculations that your customers are seeing.
We'll be back after a quick break.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. Do you want more warehouse content delivered to your inbox? Sign up for our new email series called Warehouse Wisdom Wednesday to get an educational series of emails on warehouse basics delivered directly to you every Wednesday morning. Find the sign up link in the show notes.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's two things with the ROI we're seeing on the smaller modular quick deploy projects. It's really cut and dry, very simple,
Mm,
under 2 years that we can throw this equipment in there and get them the payback. But on the bigger deploys, we're seeing customers go out to as much as 5 years. I was reading an article recently about Emerson that recently pushed their ROI calculations out to 5 years just because of the labor issues and
mm,
supply chain, et cetera. So we're seeing much more comfort level with boards to not only agree to that longer term, but to compound on what Keith said about performance guarantees on efficiency. We're seeing extended warranties. Customers don't want a 1 year warranty; they want a 2 year warranty,
mm,
or possibly even 30-month or 3 year warranty. They want guaranteed spare parts replacement times, life cycle issues that they're going to have over the next 2 years that they want guarantees on. So the bigger contracts are much more in depth than they were, say, 5 to 10 years ago, where it was okay, if you're late, you get penalized for delivering it late, and we know it's going to do 50 cases a minute, et cetera. So
mm.
now there's a lot more moving parts in these bigger contracts with these big distribution and warehouse projects.
Very interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's such an interesting thing to look at that calculation now. And, Kevin get a little creative there with it. I think it's interesting, but it makes a lot of sense. 'Cause as you guys are talking about that, I'm thinking about a session that I was at a conference a couple weeks ago. And, there was some discussion around the amount of revenue that companies will miss out on just because they don't have the labor to be able to do the work, essentially, and knowingly that they will be missing out on this revenue because they can't get that labor under control. And I think that's such a important factor to consider as well, right? And putting what does that look like in terms of lost sales, or what does that look like in terms of, you mentioned the quality of labor there, even in that sense too. I think it's such a good thing because you can certainly get some heads in the warehouse, but that doesn't mean they're very productive heads, right? I guess in a sense. So,
Right.
yeah, so it's interesting to factor those things in there. So now tell us a little bit about, you kind of mentioned about upskilling there a little bit and pulling users forward in a sense. So talk to us a little bit about kind of this concept or idea of automation helping to pull users forward. What does that really mean? Sure.
I think bringing users forward, there's two things that are working in the end user's favor. One is the ease of deployment and the increased technology of things like programming.
Mm.
Obviously, I'll mention the AI word, machine learning. And then there's also the trend that we are actually seeing that bigger companies are starting to self-integrate. So what makes it possible for them to do that self-integration, which I think is helping pull those users forward, is all of the subgroups. For example, in a typical robotic application, you have an input, an output, and in the middle is the robot. It could be an AMR, could be a multi-axis arm. And on that arm, there's a end of arm tool, and there's a dress out to get the power and the control to the end of arm tool, and then the programming. Well, all of those ancillary OEMs that support integrators like us are now starting to support these self-integrating larger companies where, they'll supply the end of arm tool, the dress out, and it's getting to the point where it's quite easy for simple tasks, not complex tasks, for customers to integrate them with their own internal teams. We're seeing specific to robotics, specific to AGVs and AMRs, actual corporate engineering teams on some of these larger warehouse and distribution companies that are actually doing some of that self-integration. I don't think it'll ever take away our job or Keith's job in regards to the companies that do these projects for them, but it is taking some of the market share that is on more of the simple side and the ease side, and allowing them to do some self-integration, which is the jury's still out in my book on is that a good thing or a bad thing? But because we get calls all the time, hey, we've got this robot here and we can't make it work. Can you come in and help us? So we get a fair amount of those that think they're self-integrators that are not. And we, again, our service team and, the service network and most of the robot groups are quite extensive. So there's a fair amount of that rework going on out there.
Interesting.
I think it's a testament to the automation, right, and the advancements in the software side, right. So that ease of integration, like Jim mentioned, is getting to a point that certain technologies customers could consider self-integrating, right. So I think that's a testament to the various companies that are part of TRG and beyond, right, that are doing great work to make it easier for themselves to integrate, which by extension makes it easier for customers to support themselves. As the customer is able to support themselves long term, that gives them confidence to move forward for the next project. And maybe the next project they do self integration because the software has been improved to a point that they can actually understand it. Especially in the AMR space and some of the collaborative robot space, right? Some of the softwares there are becoming to the point that young folks coming up using iPods and some technologies like those, it's inherent, right? So I wouldn't say it's easy for them to acclimate to robots, but it's getting easier day by day. It also maybe twist just a little bit from a different direction.
Sure.
I think the work that PRG and really social media is doing is helping to pull users forward. So we see quite regularly, humanized robots, collaborative robots. We see lots of social media posts, YouTube, LinkedIn, and others, right? With cool automation. That's my tagline is building our customers' confidence in robots, right? So that's what my job. I'm sure Jim has the same job, and that's really what we want to do is get our customers, internal and external, to be more comfortable with robots, and their comfort level then pulls them forward, right? If they see social posts, if they see material, if they talk to their colleagues about success that they've seen, that then elevates their confidence and they have more propensity to move forward. So I think really the way that we communicate in today's day and age compared to how it was 20, 40, 80 years ago, that's also accelerating our push into automation.
I will add there
Sure.
just one more point about exposure. MHI's Modex and ProMat and other automation trade shows. Every year we go in there, we see so much more actual live exhibits. So it used to be, just go into the show and put your big TVs up and try to explain to somebody how easy a robot is to automate by a video playing. Now they're actually doing with hands-on where, anybody walking up can program a collaborative robot or, teach a path on an AMR, load and unload a system. The hands-on experience that these trade shows like Modex and ProMat give are invaluable for customers to just get that comfort level to just take that step forward towards automation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great point there, on both sides is, seeing and creating that awareness just amongst users or would-be potential users of what's out there potentially, and even the younger generation, like getting them, interested in warehousing itself, right? I mean, on the surface, I think, kids are like, warehouse, like, oh, I don't know if I want to work around a warehouse, right? And then you start to see some of this technology and things that are happening in there, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, like that's pretty cool, actually, like that's interesting, right? So I think that's a way to get in. And then, like you mentioned, Jim, now you go into these trade shows and there's movement happening like all around, right? These things are actually happening in real time, and the fact that they can get something moving and going right in a short amount of time frame, I guess, to get that booth set up and get those things there so people can get that hands-on experience, I think is also a testament to the advancement in the technology and the things that are its capabilities and what it's able to do. So I guess as we kind of on that note, in a sense, as we look towards the future, right? Because there's still a lot, I think, that can happen in robotics. Certainly, what are you seeing is the next few years of robotics look like? What's a technology that stands out to you, or an application that you think is going to be one to really watch closely that'll be exciting for those end users? Jim, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I think a couple of things there. One would be obviously robotic inspection and other tasks that operators are doing now attached to vision attached to robotics, to where we're eliminating quality control issues. That technology is growing just as fast with the robotics space in regards to quick deploy. Multiple vendors have standalone systems that are plug and play that can say, yes, there's 10 bottles in this case. No, there's not 10 bottles in this case, for example, or this label is on backwards, etc. And those are quick deploy ancillary components to an automation system. When attached to robots, can really eliminate labor issues, quality issues, and be done, relatively affordably. The second thing is obviously the programming of each of these components, whether it's an AMR or a robot, collaborative or non-collaborative. The HMI interface and the teach-pendant programming is becoming much more simpler, and quite honestly, it's only a matter of time before we can think it and it will it will program itself. So certainly a number of years away, I'm sure, but certainly exciting to see the quickness in which robots can be programmed and integrated into a plant floor.
Interesting.
For me, it's a little bit, those are definitely good ones, Jim. We're also excited to see the plateauing of 3D vision. So we do a lot of tote-based ASRSs at Dematic. And as part of that tote-based ASRS today, quite often there's a person, right, doing a piece picking, item picking out of that tote, right? There are a number of really high quality vision systems that can look into the tote now, identify individual items, and give good guidance to have a robot execute a pick of an actual item. So we see a push into that space that we're going to be converting people doing those picking tasks to having automation do the picking task. So we're excited about that. And that plateauing of the vision is exciting for us, because that really we've reached the ceiling, or I think really close to reaching the ceiling from a vision perspective. Where I see the trend in the market is changing is that now we need to solve the gripping half, right? Yeah. We've been using historically vacuum type grippers to do that pick. And while that gets us to, we'll just say 75% of the items are pickable with vacuum, that last 25%, we've got to figure out a better way to do that. And I think that I see that the hand is one of the key pieces, right? So whether it's attached to a humanoid robot or whether it's attached to a fixed articulated arm robot, getting a hand-like device that's really well designed, ready for prime time at an industrial setting, I think that's going to be a key unlock. So we're really excited about the development of hands by various different technology companies, even institutions that are working hard on that problem statement, right? How do we get a hand and the brain connected to the hand to actually work together? So that's something we're excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such lots of interesting things there happening, definitely. And I don't know if you guys saw the Tesla hands like just recently as we were recording this, but that is pretty fascinating too. And I think that's, one of the big challenges I see too there is like, how do we get that gripping? And we kind of take for granted, I think, all the things that our hands can do in a sense, right? Until we try to replicate it in a different form factor. So very interesting stuff with you both here, and super insightful on kind of what's happening in the market in terms of robotics right now, what people are looking at and what's top of mind, and what's coming in the future as well. And I think it'd be interesting to see how this continues to develop. I mean, I would say, even though automation has been around for quite a while, we're still pretty young, I would say, in the industry, and there's a lot of ways to go and things that we can start to apply these robotic solutions to. So I want to thank you both for coming on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.